Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Friedmann, the social organizational psychologist and career coach from Columbia University. I wanted to take some time to introduce myself, talk a little bit about my service offerings and my background and training so that hopefully you can get to know me a little bit and decide whether you think I would be a good fit for your needs and whether you want to set up a free consultation. So I'll just jump right into it. I see career development as happening in four phases, and those phases are discovery, exploring options, planning and execution, and transitioning. Um, I want to be very deliberate about calling these phases rather than stages because I think stages implies that it is this very linear, categorical path where you start at point A and then you move up to point B and then you move up to point C and then up to point D in this ever escalating, never moving backward or never moving down fashion. And as many of you watching this probably have already realized, career development rarely happens that way. A very successful mentor of mine once said to me that um, if and when you become successful, it will of course look like a career looking backward. Like, of course, I started with humble beginnings, and of course, I made it to where I am because I have all of these skills and I'm really smart and I knew what to do at every single point. But it rarely looks like a career moving forward, particularly when you feel stuck or when you're at a crossroads or a dilemma and you're like, what do I do next? So I call them phases rather than stages because oftentimes it looks like going from point A to point B, but maybe back to point A, or maybe I jump from A to C only to realize that this is definitely not my path. I think I actually need to go back to A again, or maybe I'm at D and I need to go back to B and then C and then D. But for everybody, it's different. And so these phases you might encounter multiple times in a single career. I know I have. So let me talk a little bit about what each phase is in depth. So the first phase is discovery. And for me, this is about answering four big questions. What do I really want out of a job? What am I good at? What do I love doing? And then what jobs out there on the market are actually good fits for me given the answers to those first three questions? And in my career development program, in my coaching program, the goal of the discovery phase is to identify what I call your visas, and that stands for values, interests, skills, and abilities. So going over those pretty quickly. Skills and abilities, those are probably the most obvious to everybody. That's basically what are you good at? What are you ready to deliver the market? Or what natural innate talents do you have that you could develop and then make useful to people? Then there's what are your interests? And these could be subject matter interests like I find technology really interesting, or I find climate change really interesting. I find politics really interesting. It could be tasks that you like doing. I like writing. I like public speaking. I like talking to people. I like organizing things. I like designing things. I like calculating things. It could be roles that you like to play. I like to play the role of teacher or mentor or leader or designer or whatever. It could be industries and sectors that you're drawn to. I'm really interested in the hospitality industry or in the fashion industry. And then it could be missions that you are particularly drawn to. I'm very, very compelled by climate change awareness or public health, something like that. So it could be any of these interests. And then we get to the category that is by far the most abstract, but I think also the most overlooked. And that is the category of values. I routinely see people who know what their interests are. They know they're interested in technology, or they know they're interested in climate change, or they know they're interested in the fashion industry, but they're not quite sure what their values are. Maybe they haven't even thought about what their values are. So if I could quickly define values, I would say that values are what help you make difficult choices. So if you are caught in a dilemma of where you feel like you have to choose between A and B, and you really, really like A, but you also really, really like B, your values are going to help you make a decision of which you actually value more. And in the context of career development, I see two categories of values as being relevant here. So one is what I call within work values, and the other is what I call outside of work values. So inside of work values are things like, do you prefer to work in big organizations or small organizations? Do you prefer to manage other people, or do you prefer to be an independent contributor? Do you like to work on a team or not? Do you like your role to be very highly structured and well defined and have everything sort of laid out for you and then you just have to execute? Or do you like to be the person coming up with the strategy and sort of being given a blank slate and creative? So these are what I call sort of within work values. And then there are the even bigger values, which I call extra work values or outside of work values. And it's basically designed to answer the question, what needs do you want or need your career to meet? And this is basically, how do you rank things like, in terms of importance, income, benefits, work-life balance, job security, cultural fit, ability to relate to my teammates and feel a sense of connection or community, the ability for me to exercise my competencies. So what I have learned, both through mentors and also my own anecdotal personal experience, is that it is very, very difficult to satisfy all of your needs maximally, and so you're going to have to make trade-offs. And this is where the values question comes in. So, for example, I have friends who make a lot of money, and I mean a lot of money, what I would consider to be a lot of money, more money than I imagined somebody could make, say at their age, but who also are committing a lot of time and sweat and energy and sleep to their jobs. I also know people who have a lot of work-life balance, but who don't make as much money. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, you can find both, but oftentimes you have to make trade-offs with things like this. Or they have a great job that pays really, really well, but they have a boss who is really difficult. Or they have a job that they really, really love, that they're really, really good at, but they have to travel a lot and they don't love traveling. So I like to talk clients through these kinds of questions and dilemmas of what choices make sense given what's most important to you. So what comes out of the discovery phase, ideally, is what I call a target job profile. And this is basically identifying industries and sectors that are good fits for you, types of organizations that are good fits for you, and including organizational cultures that are good fit for you, and also the kinds of roles that are good fits for you. Then we get to the phase of exploring options. So we identify, okay, what are my options? Then we ask questions like, what are the trade-offs? I just talked about the trade-offs. So what trade-offs would I have to make if I'm going from being a lawyer to being a social worker, or if I'm going from being an artist to being a teacher, or if I'm going from being an investment banker to being a psychologist, or what have you? What trade-offs would I have to make? How do these trade-offs feel to me? What barriers stand between me, where I am right now, and that ideal future that I want to get to? And these include both what I call external barriers, like if I want to become a lawyer, I'm going to have to go to law school, and then I'm going to have to pass the bar. So those are sort of external barriers that stand between me and my goal. Or also internal barriers. And this is something that I didn't used to have built into my career coaching model, but I ran into so many people who had internal barriers that I realized I needed to make space for this. And thankfully, this is where my psychology background comes into play. So what internal barriers are an example of them would be somebody who has this goal that they really want to reach, but they're not sure if they actually can reach it. And so they have this internal fear, or this internal trepidation or hesitancy to actually take steps toward that goal because they haven't resolved those internal conflicts or those sort of internal entanglements. And so this is where a concept of career readiness comes into play, which is, okay, you've identified the goal, but are you actually ready to take these steps? And oftentimes what this might look like is, let's say somebody is interested in becoming a social worker. They might not be ready to actually start applying for social work school yet. It might be a question of instead talking to their friends who are social workers, or reaching out to social workers on, say, LinkedIn and asking them questions like, what does a day in your work life actually look like? What does a good day look like? What does a bad day look like? What do you love most about your job? What do you hate about your job? Um, what do you wish you knew when you first started your career here, or even before you got into this career, that you know now, that if you knew it at the time, you might do things a little bit differently? So reaching out to people, having informational interviews, talking to them about these things. It could mean sitting in on a class in a social work graduate program, in a social work graduate school. So gathering information. So you might not be ready to take that big step, but you want to gather information first. So this is what I call the exploring options phase. And then if people are ready, at the end of this phase, we ask the question, which of these options makes the most sense for you? Then we get into the planning and execution phase. So this could look like job hunting, in which case we'll talk about things like how to do an effective job search strategically, how to build a LinkedIn profile that actually gets the attention of hiring managers, that puts your qualifications that presents them in a way that's visible and in a way that's attractive and in a way that communicates your ability to do that job. How do you write an effective resume, cover letter? How do you develop something that I call a personal value proposition? How do you prepare for interviews? How do you negotiate and close offers, and so on? Or it could look like putting together an application for business school or law school or graduate school or medical school or whatever. And in some cases, it could be developing a business plan for people who want to go the entrepreneurial route. So this, of course, looks different for everybody, but the planning and execution phase is basically going from theoretical idea into action. And this is where we set up goals that I call, or I didn't make this up, but goals that are SMART goals. And by SMART, I don't just mean intelligent, I mean goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. So to use an analogy from the world of fitness, instead of saying, I want to get in shape, you say, I want to run the New York City Marathon in November of 2025. Okay, what do I need to do between now and November of 2025 to prepare for that marathon? I need to register for the marathon. I need to find a charity if that's a requirement. I need to start training. What is my training regimen going to look like? And then tying actual milestones to dates and saying, if I need to run the marathon by November of 2025, then here's what I need to be doing by June of 2025. Here's what I need to be doing by October of 2024, and so on. So that's planning and execution. And then the last phase is transitioning. So once you've gotten into that graduate program or that business school program or what have you, or once you've gotten hired into this new role, or once you've launched this business, how do you adapt to this new reality? How do I adapt to the demands of this job, of this graduate program? How do I acclimate to this new culture that I'm in? How do I calibrate with my new boss, my new manager? How do I help them understand what my strengths and weaknesses are? How do I understand what their strengths and weaknesses are so we can know how to work with each other and have what I call process conversations? So hopefully this gives you a sense of what career coaching can look like. I also want to point out that not everybody needs all four phases. Some people come to me and they just need the job hunting phase. They just want to know how to write an effective resume that's going to get the attention of a hiring manager. Some people just want to do the discovery phase, and that's fine. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about my background. So I studied economics and finance as an undergraduate, and I started my career as a financial analyst at IBM, the tech company, and I did that for a couple years until I realized that was not the route that I wanted to go. Interestingly, I did a few different things for IBM. I mostly was a financial analyst, but I also worked a little bit in operations, project management, and actually learning and development. And what was interesting was that in that role, not only was I a financial analyst, but I was asked to train other financial analysts. And what I realized was that I actually enjoyed teaching other people how to crunch the numbers and perform the calculations and prepare financial reports more than I actually enjoyed doing it myself. And that was when I decided at the time that I wanted to go get a PhD in economics and become a business school professor. So I moved up to Boston and I worked at business schools at MIT and Harvard. And while originally I was interested in economics, I actually got exposed to something called behavioral economics and then ultimately social and organizational psychology, which is what you can imagine led me to where I am today. But along the way, I started my own learning and development practice. Initially, I was mostly training people in either business school or in financial services. I was training them in what I knew at the time, which was economics, accounting, finance, Microsoft Excel modeling, and that kind of stuff, kind of quantitative stuff. And then at some point, I realized I wanted to be more on the human side of things than on the quantitative side of things. Not that I don't love math, but life is incomplete if you're only thinking about things in analytical, logical terms, I learned. And one day when I was training somebody in finance, by the way, I decided to abandon my PhD aspirations in economics and launched a learning and development business that, as I said, was initially in the economics and finance space. And I was training somebody in economics or in finance one day, and she said to me, "Have you ever thought about coaching? Have you ever thought about becoming a coach?" And I said, "No, what's coaching?" And she told me that she had been given a coach by her organization, and it was something like life-changing for her. And I was immediately fascinated. I myself had had great personal breakthroughs in therapy. I was always really interested in psychology. And of course, I was interested in business. And this almost sounded like, or it actually was, the psychology of people at work. And I had never heard of this before. And I was like, this is completely fascinating. Please tell me more. So I ultimately asked this client to introduce me to her coach. So I met her coach, and her coach had gone to a graduate program at Columbia University called the Social Organizational Psychology Program. So to make a long story, a medium story, I ended up applying to that program, getting in, and doing a graduate degree there. And I studied things like organizational culture and leadership skills and group dynamics, team dynamics, social emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, negotiation, career development, executive coaching, and so on. And over the past 12 years, I've had something like 300 coaching clients. I've worked with fund managers, attorneys, bankers, consultants, CPAs, professional athletes, officers in the US military. I've worked with people in finance, technology, healthcare, media, hospitality, education, government, the nonprofit world. I've coached people from Bain & Company, Goldman Sachs, Google, Credit Suisse, Johnson & Johnson, the White House, and something like 40 others. I've also worked with undergraduate and business school students at Harvard, Yale, Columbia, NYU Stern, the Wharton School, Chicago Booth, the London School of Economics, Oxford, and a couple dozen others. So hopefully you have some sense of who I am and what service offerings I can bring you in the world of career coaching. So if you're interested in a free consultation, feel free to reach out.